What if I told you that the most powerful force shaping your financial future isn't in your hands? That a small group of unelected officials can manipulate markets, inflate asset bubbles, and widen the gap between the elite and everyone else with the press of a button? Today, we expose the silent force that's been rigging the rules of the economic game, and how you can finally break free. This is The Lords of Easy Money by Christopher Leonard, a chilling deep dive into the Federal Reserve's hidden mechanics, the dangers of endless money printing, and the explosive consequences of unchecked financial power. If you want to understand why your dollar doesn't stretch like it used to, if you're serious about mastering the system instead of being mastered by it, if you crave clarity in a world drowning in economic noise, then this episode is your wake-up call. We're not just summarizing a book. We're unlocking the unseen forces of inflation, asset distortion, and monetary manipulation, and arming you with the tools to outsmart them. And here's the twist. At the end of this episode, you'll face a knowledge check designed to not only solidify your insights, but to amplify your financial intelligence and mental clarity. A real test for those who are done being economic pawns and ready to become strategic kings. And yes, there's a valuable surprise waiting near the end, something that could shift how you think about wealth, risk, and control forever. So, stay locked in. Your ascent into economic awareness and mental dominance begins now.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're all about getting straight to the heart of what matters, and today, well, we're diving into how we actually think, how we make decisions. We'll be drawing on Daniel Kahneman's really influential work, Thinking Fast and Slow.
A classic.
Exactly. And if you, our listener, want to grasp the core ideas without getting too bogged down, you're in the right place. Our mission today is basically to pull out those key insights for you.
Yeah, and it's worth remembering, I think, that a lot of this thinking came from his amazing collaboration with Amos Tversky. Their whole approach was, well, pretty unique.
How so?
They basically studied their own minds. They looked really closely at their gut reactions, their intuitive answers to questions.
Huh. Like self-experimentation.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
And doing that let them uncover these really fundamental patterns in how we judge probabilities, how we forecast things. You know, their early stuff really focused on the predictable ways our intuition can lead us astray, the biases. It all led up to that huge 1974 paper, Judgment Under Uncertainty, Heuristics and Biases. That really laid the groundwork.
Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts then. One of Kahneman's biggest ideas is that we have essentially two ways of thinking. Two systems.
Yep.
First up is system one. This is your fast thinking. It's intuitive, automatic, often emotional, super efficient, actually. It's kind of the secret author behind a lot of our quick judgments.
Exactly. System one runs on associations, almost effortlessly. Like if you hear vomiting normally occurs,
Okay.
your mind instantly jumps to related ideas, right? Sickness, bad food, whatever. That instant unconscious connection, that's pure system one.
I see.
Or the example, finds a yellow instantly, it shows priming. Even tiny cues we don't consciously notice can activate related thoughts in system one.
So it influences what we think or feel next.
Absolutely. Our actions, emotions, thoughts, they can all be primed without us knowing. It's like your brain's this web, and plucking one strand makes others nearby vibrate. System one is just brilliant at weaving a coherent story from these connections really, really fast.
Okay, so that's the fast one. Then there's system two.
The slow one.
Right, the slow, deliberate thinker. This is the part you engage when things get tricky, when you need concentration, analysis. It's also the monitor, isn't it? It watches system one and can step in, override those gut feelings if they seem off, like that bat and ball puzzle everyone gets wrong at first.
Precisely. That first quick answer feels right, but it takes system two's effort to work out the correct solution. But, and this is crucial, system two has limited resources. It's effortful.
Right.
The book uses the example of trying to multiply, say, 23 by 78 while you're walking.
Yeah, I definitely have to stop walking.
Exactly. Because that calculation eats up so much of system two's processing power, there's just not enough left for managing walking at the same time. It shows system two is, well, often a bottleneck. We tend to use it only when we really have to, when things are complex or surprising.
Okay. Now, what happens when system one hits a hard question it can't answer instantly? It uses these things called heuristics.
That's it. Mental shortcuts, essentially.
And this is where it gets weird, right? System one often swaps the hard question for an easier related one, and we don't even notice the switch.
Yeah, that substitution is absolutely fundamental. It happens all the time. Think about deciding whether to invest in, say, Ford stock.
Okay.
The real hard question is this a good investment? But System 1 might just substitute, do I like Ford cars?
Ah, because that's easier to answer.
Much easier.
Yeah.
And your feeling about the cars might then drive your investment decision, even though, liking the car doesn't really tell you much about the stock's future.
Yeah.
The visual illusion example works the same way, the one with the three figures that look different heights on the page.
Yeah.
We're asked about their 2D size on the page, but our brain automatically sees the depth cues and answers the 3D question, how tall would they be in real life? So we make a predictable mistake about their size on the page.
Okay, so substitution is one key thing. What about other heuristics? You mentioned availability.
Right, availability. This is where we judge how frequent or likely something is based purely on how easily examples pop into our heads.
So if I can think of lots of plane crashes because they were just on the news.
You might overestimate the actual risk of flying. Exactly. Things that are vivid or recent or emotionally charged, they stick in memory and come to mind easily. So we think they're more common than they might be.
Makes sense.
But there's a twist, too. The text points out something called unexplained unavailability. If you try to recall examples of something and you find it surprisingly difficult, you might actually judge that thing as less frequent because the difficulty itself is unexpected. So it's not just how many examples, but how easy or hard it feels to recall them.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, another one is anchoring. What's that about?
Anchoring is when some initial piece of information they anchor heavily sways your later judgments.
Yeah.
Even if that anchor is totally random or irrelevant.
Even if it's irrelevant.
Yeah. The real estate agent experiment is a great example. They showed agents a house, but gave them different asking prices beforehand, some high, some low.
Okay.
And even though these were experienced professionals, and they said the asking price wouldn't affect their valuation, it absolutely did. Those given a high anchor value the house much higher than those given a low anchor.
Wow. Even the experts.
Even the experts. And they often didn't even realize they were being influenced. The anchor just subtly pulled their judgment towards it.
So how do you fight that?
Well, one strategy mentioned is to actively think the opposite. Force yourself to consider reasons why that anchor might be wrong. Engage System 2, basically. To challenge that first impression could be useful in negotiations, right? Think about why their first offer is way off base.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's move on to representativeness. This sounds like stereotyping.
It's very related, yes. Representativeness is judging the probability of something based on how well it matches a stereotype or prototype we have in our minds. The problem is, we often ignore crucial background information, the base rates.
Like the Steve the Librarian example.
Exactly. The description of Steve, meek, tidy, loves poetry, fits our stereotype of a librarian perfectly.
Right.
So we tend to think it's more likely he is a librarian, even if we know statistically there are vastly more male farmers out there. The stereotype match overrides the base rate probability.
Okay.
Or that funny thought about Elvis Presley's parents wanting him to be a dentist. It's funny because Elvis doesn't fit our dentist stereotype at all. System 1 instantly flags that mismatch.
I see. And the Linda problem. Linda the bank teller.
Ah, yes, the Linda problem. It shows how representativeness can make us violate basic logic. People are given a description of Linda. She's bright, concerned with social justice, participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Then they're asked which is more probable. A, Linda is a bank teller, or B, Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement.
And people choose B more often, right? Even though logically B is a subset of A, so it has to be less probable?
Exactly. But because the description sounds more representative of a feminist bank teller than just a bank teller, option B feels more plausible, more representative. System 1 goes with the better story, not the logic.
But you mentioned how the question is asked matters, something about frequencies.
Yes, that's really interesting. If you phrase these kinds of problems using frequencies like, out of 100 people like Linda, how many are bank tellers? And how many are bank tellers active in the feminist movement? People are much less likely to make the error.
Why is that?
It seems like thinking in terms of frequencies, like actual counts of people, makes the relationship between the sets clearer. It helps System 2 see that the feminist bank tellers are part of the larger group of bank tellers. Percentages are a bit more abstract.
Got it. Okay, System 1 also seems quick to see cause and effect, sometimes where it doesn't exist. Causality illusions.
Oh, definitely. We're pattern seekers, and we're wired to look for causes. Think about the hot hand in basketball.
Yeah, when a player makes a few shots in a row, everyone thinks they're hot and more likely to make the next one.
Right. But statistical analysis often shows those streaks are just what you'd expect from random chance. There's often no actual hot hand, just randomness that our system one desperately wants to interpret as a causal pattern. Michaud's old experiments with moving squares showed this too. People automatically saw causality, one square pushing another, even knowing it was just shapes on a screen.
This connects to another big idea, doesn't it? What you see is all there is WISIOD.
Yes, WISID is huge. It basically means our judgments are dominated by the information that's immediately available and seems relevant. We don't naturally stop to think, wait, what information am I missing?
And that leads to overconfidence.
Absolutely. If the information we do have makes a coherent, plausible story, System 1 feels satisfied, and we feel confident, even if that story is based on very limited or even biased evidence. WISID explains a lot.
Like framing effects.
Exactly. Framing effects are a direct result. If you frame a surgery outcome as 90% survival rate, that feels good, right? You focus on the survival.
Yeah.
But frame the exact same outcome as 10% mortality rate, and suddenly it feels much riskier because you're focused on the deaths. Same data, different focus, different feeling, potentially different decision. It's all about what WISID highlights.
And base rate neglect, too. We ignore the statistics because the specific story seems more real.
Precisely. The vivid details of the individual case, what you see, just overwhelm the more abstract statistical base rate information. WISID.
Okay, the text also mentions regression to the mean. That sounds statistical.
It is. It's the simple idea that extreme performances, whether really good or really bad, are often followed by performances closer to the average, just due to chance, largely.
And we misinterpret that.
We often do.
Yeah.
The flight instructor example is perfect. Instructors noticed that when they praised a pilot for an exceptionally good landing, the next landing was usually worse. And when they yelled at a pilot for a really bad landing, the next one was usually better. So they concluded, wrongly, that punishment works better than praise.
But it was just regression to the mean.
Mostly, yeah. The unusually good or bad landings likely had a big element of luck or randomness. The next landing was simply more likely to be closer to that pilot's average skill level, regardless of the feedback. But the instructor saw a causal pattern that wasn't really there.
It's kind of humbling to think that simple formulas or algorithms can often outperform human experts.
It is, isn't it? Paul Muell's work back in the 50s showed this in clinical psychology. Simple statistical rules often predicted patient outcomes better than experienced clinicians' judgments.
Wow.
And think about the APGAR score for newborns. It's a very simple, standardized checklist, an algorithm, really. And it's been incredibly effective in improving infant health by providing a reliable assessment, much better than just subjective impressions.
But people resist that idea.
Oh, definitely. There's often resistance. We like to think human intuition, especially expert intuition, is somehow richer or more nuanced. Sometimes it is, but in predictable environments, especially with lots of data, algorithms are often surprisingly good, sometimes better.
Okay, another common bias. The planning fallacy. We're all guilty of this, I think. Being way too optimistic about how long projects will take.
Oh, absolutely. Home renovations, writing reports, planning holidays, we consistently underestimate the time and resources needed. We tend to focus on the best-case scenario, our specific plan, and forget about all the things that could go wrong.
So how do we combat that? The book mentions the outside view.
Right. The outside view is about deliberately ignoring the specifics of your project for a moment, and instead looking at the track record of similar projects in the past. How long did they actually take? What problems did they run into?
Like the textbook example in the book.
Exactly. The curriculum writing team was wildly optimistic about their timeline. But Seymour, who had experience, took the outside view. He asked about similar projects elsewhere, found out they typically took years longer and often failed, providing a much more realistic, if sobering, forecast.
That makes sense. And the pre-mortem. That sounds useful for teams.
Yeah, the pre-mortem is clever. Before a project starts, you imagine it has failed spectacularly. Yeah. Then the team brainstorms all the possible reasons why it failed. It's a way to proactively uncover potential risks and weaknesses that might get overlooked in the initial optimistic planning phase.
Smart. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Talk about prospect theory. This is Kahneman and Tversky's alternative to how economists traditionally thought about decisions under risk, right?
It's exactly. Traditional utility theory assumed people make rational choices based on the final states of wealth. Prospect theory says, no, it's more psychological than that.
What are the key ideas?
Well, first, the reference point is crucial. We don't evaluate outcomes in absolute terms, but as gains or losses relative to where we are now or what we expect.
Okay.
Second, loss aversion. This is huge. Losses hurt roughly twice as much as equivalent gains feel good. Losing $10 feels way worse than finding $10 feels good.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
It makes us very motivated to avoid losses.
Yeah.
Third, diminishing sensitivity.
Yeah.
The difference between gaining $10 and $20 feels bigger than the difference between gaining $10 and $10 to $20. Same $10 difference, but its subjective impact diminishes as the amounts get larger, say for losses.
And there were effects related to probability, too. Certainty and possibility.
Right. The certainty effect means we overweight outcomes that are certain compared to outcomes that are merely highly probable. We'll often pay a premium to eliminate risk entirely. And the possibility effect means we overweight very small probabilities. It's why lottery tickets are appealing, despite the terrible odds. That tiny chance of a huge win gets more psychological weight than it statistically deserves.
And all this ties back into framing effects, right? Because how you frame something determines whether it feels like a gain or a loss relative to that reference point.
Absolutely. Framing is critical in prospect theory. The surgery example again. 90% survival frames it as a gain survival, while 10% mortality frames it as a loss, death. Same outcome, but the framing changes the reference point and triggers loss aversion differently.
Like the 90% fat-free versus 10% fat meat.
Perfect example. Fat-free sounds like a gain.
Oh?
10% fat sounds like a loss, unhealthy. It changes how we feel and choose. And think about organ donation rates.
Oh yeah, the opt-in versus opt-out systems.
Huge difference in donation rates. Now, it's simply changing the default option, the frame, dramatically changes behavior. Opt-out frames not donating as an active step, a potential loss of contributing, while opt-in frames donating as the active step. Defaults are powerful frames.
Okay, nearly there. The excerpts also bring up the idea of two selves.
Ah, yes. The experiencing self and the remembering self.
What's the difference?
The experiencing self is the one living life moment by moment. It's the stream of consciousness feeling pain or pleasure right now. The remembering self is the one that looks back, evaluates past experiences, tells the stories of our lives, and makes decisions based on those memories.
And they don't always agree.
Not at all. The remembering self is kind of a flawed historian. It's heavily influenced by the peak end rule and duration neglect.
Okay, what are those?
The peak end rule means that our memory of an experience is dominated by how it felt at its most intense moment, the peak, and how it felt right at the end. Duration neglect means the overall length of the experience doesn't matter nearly as much to the remembering self.
The cold hand experiment showed this.
Beautifully. People put one hand in painfully cold water for 60 seconds, then the other hand for 60 seconds, plus another 30 seconds, where the water was slightly less cold but still unpleasant.
So, more total pain in the second trial.
Right. The experiencing self suffered more. But when asked later which trial they'd prefer to repeat, most chose the longer one. Why? Because the end was slightly less painful, making the overall memory, dominated by the peak and end, seem less bad to the remembering self. Duration was neglected.
Wow. That has big implications for how we judge our lives, doesn't it? Or even movies or vacations.
Huge implications. The remembering self is the one making choices about the future, based on these potentially biased memories. It cares more about good stories with strong endings than the sum total of moment-to-moment experience.
And finally, the focusing illusion. What we pay attention to can distort things.
Yes. When you think about a particular aspect of life, it tends to seem much more important for overall well-being than it actually is when you're just living your life.
Like the example about asking people how happy paraplegics are.
Exactly. When you focus on paraplegia, you think about all the limitations, and you might assume people with paraplegia must be constantly unhappy.
But that's not necessarily true.
Research suggests that while it's obviously a huge life change, people adapt. Their moment-to-moment happiness, when they're not actively thinking about their condition, but just engaged in daily life, can often be surprisingly similar to non-paraplegics. But the focusing illusion makes us overestimate the impact of that one salient factor when we're asked to judge overall happiness. We forget about adaptation and all the other things that make up daily experience.
So, wrapping this all up, it's really about this constant interplay between the fast, intuitive System 1 and the slow, effortful System 2. And understanding these concepts, heuristics, biases, framing, the two selves it gives us, and you listening, a much richer way to think about thinking, doesn't it? A vocabulary for discussing judgments and choices.
Absolutely. It's not about eliminating System 1, we couldn't function without it, But recognizing its tendencies, its potential pitfalls, that's the first step. It allows us to know when maybe we should slow down, engage System 2, question our gut feelings, especially when the stakes are high.
So, key takeaways. We've got the two systems, fast and slow. System 1 uses heuristics, shortcuts like availability, anchoring, representativeness, which can lead to biases. Framing matters hugely. And our memories, shaped by the remembering self, aren't always accurate reflections of our experiences.
Precisely. And maybe a final thought for you to consider. Now that you have a better handle on these cognitive quirks, how might that awareness help you navigate your own world differently? Think about decisions around money or health, or even just understanding disagreements better. This dive is really just scratching the surface of how fascinatingly complex our minds are.
You've just unlocked some of the most dangerous truths hidden in plain sight. Truths that most people will never confront. The Lords of Easy Money isn't just a book. It's a red flag, a battle cry, a survival guide for anyone who refuses to be manipulated by invisible forces pulling the economic strings. But here's the hard truth. If you walk away from this without action, you're not just uninformed, you're vulnerable. In this age of asset bubbles, runaway debt, and monetary madness, ignorance isn't just expensive, it's catastrophic. So here's what you must do now. Subscribe, not to a channel, but to a movement that arms you with real knowledge in a world designed to keep you distracted. Smash that like button if you're done being a passive player in a rigged game. Dive into the links below. We've packed them with exclusive resources, frameworks, and extended insights you won't find anywhere else. Join the conversation, because the ones who talk about money with awareness win. We're bringing in the panel now, a powerful discussion that will dissect the Fed, Wall Street's blind spots, and how you can turn awareness into advantage. And finally, your knowledge check is here. This isn't for the curious. This is for the committed. For those who want to prove, and not just to us, but to themselves, that they've absorbed, understood, and are ready to act on this knowledge. This is the test that separates those who wish from those who will. Answer the questions, cement your mastery, and remember, in a world ruled by easy money, only the prepared truly prosper.